Let me start from the beginning because this whole situation is so messed up that even I'm having trouble believing it actually happened. 2 years ago, I was working as a marketing coordinator for a mid sized tech company. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid decent money and I had good benefits. I'd been there for about 3 years when they decided to do massive layoffs. I found out on a Tuesday morning that my position was eliminated, effective immediately. They gave me 2 weeks severance and wished me luck. Just like that, I was unemployed. I was pretty devastated because the job market was rough at the time. I had about $8,000 in my savings account, and my rent was $1,400 a month. So I knew I had maybe 4 or 5 months before things got really desperate. I posted about the layoff on Facebook, mostly just venting and hoping maybe someone in my network might know of an opening somewhere. It was one of those posts where you're trying to sound optimistic, but you're actually terrified about your future. That's when my Uncle Ben reached out. Uncle Ben is my dad's older brother, and I barely knew him growing up. There was some kind of family drama between him and my dad that happened before I was born, and they basically didn't speak for most of my childhood. I may have seen him at 2 or 3 family gatherings total, and even then, he and my dad would just nod at each other and stay on opposite sides of the room. My dad never really explained what happened between them, just said that Ben made some bad choices and they grew apart. So, I was pretty surprised when Uncle Ben sent me a private message saying he saw my post and that he owned a consulting firm in another city. He said business was booming and he could use someone with my marketing background. The message was really warm and friendly, talking about how family should help family and how he'd always regretted not being closer to my dad's kids. He offered me a salary of $65,000 to start, which was actually more than I was making at the tech company. Plus, he said he'd help with relocation costs. I was skeptical at first because it seemed too good to be true. I did some research on his company, Ben's strategic consulting company, and it looked legitimate. They had a decent website, were registered properly with the state of Arizona, and had what appeared to be real client testimonials. My parents were not thrilled about the idea. My mom was worried about me moving so far away. And my dad was particularly uncomfortable with me working for Ben. When I pressed him for details about their history, he just said that Ben had always been someone who cut corners and looked for easy ways to make money. But I was desperate, and $65,000 plus relocation assistance was hard to turn down. So I accepted the offer, packed up my life, and moved. First few months working for Uncle Ben were actually great. The company operated out of a nice office building, and my job was to handle all their marketing and business development. We had about 12 employees total, mostly consultants and project managers, plus a small admin staff. Uncle Ben was incredibly welcoming and generous. He took me out for expensive dinners, helped me find an apartment, and constantly talked about how happy he was to have family involved in the business. About 6 months in, Uncle Ben started giving me more responsibilities and talking about how I was his most trusted employee. He began including me in higher level business discussions and started hinting that I could potentially become a partner in the company someday. I was flattered and worked even harder to prove myself worthy of his confidence. First sign that something might be off came about a year into the job. I started noticing that we seemed to have a lot of clients who paid exclusively in cash and never wanted detailed invoices or contracts. When I brought it up to Uncle Ben, he explained that many small business owners preferred to keep things simple and that cash payments help them manage their books more easily. Over the next several months, I started noticing other small things that seemed odd. Some of our clients were clearly struggling financially, but they were paying us tens of thousands of dollars for consulting services that seemed pretty basic. We had meetings scheduled at weird times and locations, sometimes in parking lots or cheap restaurants instead of professional offices. I tried to rationalize everything because Uncle Ben had been so good to me. He'd given me a raise after my first year, up to $72,000, and continued to treat me like family. I was making good money, living in a nice apartment, and had finally started to feel financially secure again. I didn't want to rock the boat over some minor suspicion that could probably be explained away. Last month, everything changed. Uncle Ben called me into his office on a Wednesday afternoon and said he had something important to discuss. He closed the door, sat down across from me with this serious expression I'd never seen before. He started by thanking me for my hard work and loyalty over the past 2 years and said that he now considered me to be like a son to him. Then he told me the truth about the family business. Turns out, Ben Strategic Consulting Company was basically a front for an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. Uncle Ben had been working with a network of small business owners throughout Arizona and New Mexico to stage fake accidents, fires, thefts, and other incidents that would trigger large insurance payouts. The consulting work was real, but it was mostly about helping these businesses create believable scenarios for their fraudulent claims and coaching them on how to deal with insurance investigators. I felt like I was going to throw up as he explained the whole operation to me. He said he'd been running this scheme for about 5 years and had helped his clients collect millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance claims. But here's where it gets even worse. Uncle Ben told me that he was planning to expand the operation significantly, but he needed someone on the inside of a major construction company to help facilitate the next phase. And that someone was going to be me. My dad works as a financial controller for a mid sized construction company. It's a family owned company that's been around for about 30 years and has contracts with several major developers in the surrounding area. Uncle Ben had apparently been searching my dad's company and discovered that they carry massive insurance policies covering everything from equipment theft to project delays to worker injuries. The plan was for me to move back home and somehow get hired at my dad's company. Uncle Ben said my marketing background and family connection would make it easy for me to get a job there, probably in their business development or client relations departments. Once I was inside, I would help orchestrate a series of fake incidents that would trigger huge insurance payouts. He laid out this whole elaborate scheme where we would stage equipment thefts, arrange for minor accidents that looked more serious than they were, create fake delays caused by weather or supplier issues, and even potentially arrange for small fires or floods that would damage projects at critical moments. The goal was to collect insurance money while still completing the projects, essentially double dipping on every job. Uncle Ben made it clear that this wasn't a request, it was a requirement if I wanted to stay part of the family business. He said I had proven my loyalty over the past 2 years, but now I needed to take the next step to show that I was truly committed to the organization. If I refused, he said, I would not only lose my job, but he would make sure that I could never work in marketing or consulting again anywhere in the Southwest. But the threats got even worse than that. He reminded me that I'd been involved in the day to day operations of Ben's strategic consulting company for 2 years, and that my marketing materials and client presentations were documented proof of my participation in the business. If I tried to back out or expose the operation, he would make sure that I took the fall as the mastermind behind the whole thing. I sat there in complete shock as he laid out the plan and the consequences of not cooperating. This man, who had welcomed me like family, who had saved me from unemployment and given me opportunities, was now essentially blackmailing me into betraying my own father and potentially destroying his legitimate business. The worst part is that I realized he'd been planning this from the very beginning. He hadn't reached out to me after my layoff out of kindness. He'd seen an opportunity to get someone close to my dad's company. I managed to keep it together during the meeting and told him I needed some time to think about it. He said I had until Friday to give him my answer, and that if I decided not to cooperate, I should pack my things and be prepared for the consequences. That was 3 days ago, and I haven't slept more than a few hours total since then. I keep going over everything in my mind, trying to figure out if there were signs I missed or if I could have seen this coming. I feel stupid for trusting him and getting myself into this situation, but I also feel trapped because I don't see any good options. If I go along with the plan, I'd be committing serious fraud and potentially destroying my dad's business and reputation. The company employs about 40 people, and if they got caught up in an insurance fraud investigation, it could put all of those families at risk. But if I refuse, Uncle Ben has enough evidence to make it look like I was knowingly involved in the insurance fraud operation all along. I can't talk to my parents about this because I don't want to put them in danger or make them accessories to whatever decision I make. I can't go to the authorities because I don't have any real evidence of the fraud. And Uncle Ben would just claim that I was trying to frame him to cover up my own involvement. Has anyone ever been in a situation like this? Is there any way out that I'm not seeing? I honestly don't know what to do, and I'm running out of time to figure it out. Update 1. I can't believe I'm back here updating this, but I needed somewhere to get this out because I feel like I'm losing my mind. The situation has gotten so much more complicated, and I'm starting to think I might have made the biggest mistake of my life by trying to do the right thing. Friday morning came, and I still hadn't decided what to do. Around noon, I finally worked up the courage to call Uncle Ben. I told him I couldn't go through with the plan and that I was going to quit and move back home. I didn't mention anything about going to authorities or trying to expose the operation. I just said I wanted out and couldn't be part of something that would hurt my family. He was quiet for a really long time after I told him my decision. Then he said he was disappointed but not surprised, and that he'd expected I might not have the backbone for serious business. He told me to clean out my desk and be gone by the end of the day, and that I should remember our conversation about the consequences of walking away. I thought maybe that was it, that he was just going to let me leave without following through on his threats. I packed up my stuff from the office, said goodbye to the other employees who had no idea what was really going on, and went home to start figuring out my next steps. I was actually starting to feel relieved, like maybe I'd made the right choice and could put this whole nightmare behind me. But then over the weekend, things started to go wrong in ways I never could have imagined. Saturday morning, I woke up to find that my car had been vandalized. Someone had slashed all four tires, keyed deep scratches into the paint, and broken the driver's side window. There was no note or anything, but the message was pretty clear. I called the police to file a report, but they said without any witnesses or security camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. Sunday was when things got really scary. I was at the grocery store when I noticed this guy following me around. When I left the store and started walking to my rental car, he approached me in the parking lot. He was this big, intimidating guy wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, and he walked right up to me and said that Ben wanted me to know that leaving town wasn't going to solve my problems. Then he handed me an envelope and told me to think carefully about my next moves before walking away. Inside the envelope was a copy of one of the marketing presentations I'd created for a client, except it had been doctored to make it look like I was explicitly helping them plan fraudulent insurance claims. The presentation looked incredibly damning, and I realized that Uncle Ben had probably created similar fake evidence for everything I'd worked on over the past 2 years. Monday morning, I decided I needed to try a different approach. Instead of just running away, I thought maybe I should try to gather some evidence of Ben's insurance fraud operation. I still had access to some of the company files on my work laptop, and I thought maybe I could find proof of the fraudulent claims. I spent most of Monday going through emails and documents, trying to piece together the details of Ben's operation. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. There were email chains discussing fake accidents going back years, detailed plans for staging theft and vandalism, and financial records showing exactly how much money each fraudulent claim had generated. But I also found something that made my blood run cold. There were emails discussing me specifically, dating back to before Ben even offered me the job. He'd been planning to use me to target my dad's company from the very beginning. And he'd been monitoring my social media and professional activities for months before my layoff. The emails showed that Ben had been researching the company that Dad works at for over a year and had identified it as a perfect target for his insurance fraud scheme. When he saw that I'd been laid off, he saw an opportunity to get someone inside the company who could help him execute his plan. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find that someone had been in my apartment while I was sleeping. Nothing was stolen, but things had been moved around, just enough for me to notice. The message was clear. Ben's people could get to me anywhere, anytime they wanted. I realized that I was completely trapped. I couldn't go to the police because Ben had evidence that would make me look guilty. I couldn't run away because he had connections who could find me anywhere. I couldn't fight back because he had resources and experience that I couldn't match. But I also couldn't go along with his plan because that would mean destroying my dad's business. Right now, I'm staying in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city because I don't feel safe in my apartment. I can't hide forever, and Ben is probably getting impatient about whatever his next move is going to be. Update 2. This might be my last update for a while because I think I found a way to fight back, but it's going to require me to do something incredibly risky that could either save me or make everything infinitely worse. After spending days in the motel room going over all the evidence I'd gathered, I had what was probably either a brilliant idea or the stupidest thought of my life. Instead of trying to expose Ben or run away from the situation, what if I pretended to change my mind and go back to him? Not to actually help him with his plan, but to get him to admit more details about the operation while I was secretly recording him? Ben thinks he has me completely trapped and under his control. If I went back to him and acted like I'd finally accepted that I needed to help him target my dad's company, he might get overconfident and reveal details that I could use to protect myself. Friday morning, I called Ben's office. I told his assistant that I needed to speak with him urgently. And when he got on the phone, I gave him this whole speech about how I'd spent the week thinking about our situation and realized that I'd been naive about how the business world really works. I said that getting intimidated by his people had made me understand that I couldn't afford to be idealistic about family loyalty when my own survival was at stake. I told him that I was ready to help with his plan to target Dad's company, but that I wanted to meet in person to discuss the details. Ben seemed surprised at first, but then he sounded pleased that I had supposedly come to my senses. He agreed to meet with me Friday afternoon at his office. Before the meeting, I set up a voice recording app on my phone and made sure it would capture everything he said. I was terrified about what would happen if he suspected I had recorded him, but I figured this might be my only chance to get evidence that would protect me. The meeting started off exactly like I'd hoped. Ben was in a great mood and seemed genuinely happy that I decided to cooperate with his plan. He started by apologizing for having his people intimidate me, saying that he needed to make sure I understood how serious the situation was. Then he started laying out the details of his plan for the company, and I couldn't believe how much information he was willing to share. He told me about specific insurance policies that my dad's company carried, particularly types of claims that would be most profitable, and even which employees at the insurance companies were most likely to approve large payouts without too many questions. Ben explained that the key to successful insurance fraud was making everything look like a series of unrelated bad luck incidents rather than a coordinated scheme. He wanted me to help orchestrate accidents and thefts that would happen months apart, so that no one would notice a pattern. The most disturbing part was when he started talking about how he'd been planning this for years. He admitted that he'd been monitoring my social media and professional activities long before my layoff, looking for an opportunity to get me involved in his operation. He said that when he saw I'd been laid off, he knew it was the perfect chance to bring me into the family business and eventually use me to target my dad's company. Ben also confirmed what I'd suspected about the fake evidence he'd been building against me. He showed me several documents that had been altered to make it look like I'd been knowingly helping clients plan fraudulent insurance claims. He said he'd been creating this evidence as insurance to make sure I couldn't back out once I understood what the business really involved. But as Ben was explaining all of this, he started to realize that he wasn't just planning to use me to commit fraud against my dad's company. He was planning to use me as a scapegoat for the entire operation. The way he laid out the plan, I would be the one with direct access to the company that Dad works at, and the most obvious connection between Ben and the fraudulent claims. If the scheme was ever discovered, all the evidence would point to me as the inside man who had orchestrated everything. I managed to keep recording for about an hour before Ben started to get suspicious about why I was asking so many detailed questions. The meeting ended with Ben telling me that he'd be in touch over the next few days with specific instructions about how to approach my dad's company. I left his office feeling like I'd gotten some incredibly valuable evidence, but also terrified that Ben might have figured out what I was really doing. The recording was clear and detailed, with Ben explicitly admitting to running insurance fraud schemes and planning to frame me for his crimes. Over the weekend, I started researching what to do with the recording. Sunday evening, I got a text message from an unknown number that just said, "We know what you're doing. Stop now or face the consequences." It seemed pretty clear that they suspected I wasn't actually cooperating with their plan. That's when I made the decision to take the most dangerous gamble of my life. Instead of going to the authorities with the recording, I decided to go directly to my dad and warn him about what Ben was planning. Monday morning, I drove straight back home without telling anyone where I was going. I showed up at my parents' house Monday evening without any warning and sat them down in their living room. I played the recording of my conversation with Ben, explaining everything that had happened over the past 2 years. My dad's reaction was even stronger than I'd expected. As he listened to Ben laying out his plan to commit fraud against Dad's company, I could see him getting angrier than I'd ever seen him before. When the recording was over, he told me that this explained a lot about why he and Ben had stopped speaking years ago. It turns out that Ben had tried to involve my dad in a similar scheme about 25 years ago, back when my dad was working for a different construction company. Ben had approached him with a plan to stage fake accidents and equipment thefts that would generate insurance payouts they could split. When my dad refused and threatened to report Ben to the authorities, Ben had tried to blackmail him with fake evidence just like he was doing to me. My dad said that he'd managed to avoid serious consequences back then only because he'd been smart enough to document everything and had gone to a lawyer who specialized in white collar crime. The lawyer had helped him gather enough evidence to prove that Ben was trying to frame him and had negotiated a deal where Ben agreed to leave my dad alone in exchange for not being prosecuted. My dad also warned me that Ben had probably gotten much smarter and more dangerous over the past 25 years. But then my dad made me an offer that could either save my life or put both of us in incredible danger. He said that the company that Dad works at had been dealing with some suspicious insurance claims from competitors over the past few years and that he'd been working with an investigator who specialized in construction industry fraud. My dad thinks that if we approach this investigator with the evidence I gathered, we might be able to set up a sting operation where Ben gets caught. Instead of me having to infiltrate my dad's company, we could make it look like I was cooperating while actually gathering evidence that would put Ben in prison. Update 3. After my last update, I met a fraud investigator. my dad had been working with. She specializes in insurance fraud cases. And when I showed her the recording I'd made of Ben laying out his entire operation, her eyes lit up. Insurance companies had been trying to nail Ben for years, but he always stayed in the background and let others take the fall. My recording was the first direct evidence of him orchestrating fraud himself. But the fraud investigator warned that it wasn't enough. Ben was careful with backup plans and escape routes. To really stop him, we needed to catch him in the act, this time targeting my dad's company. The fraud investigator proposed something terrifying. I would go back to the city, pretend I was ready to move forward with Ben's plan, and work with her team to document everything. I'd tell Ben I'd spoken with my dad and identified opportunities for staged incidents at his company. The fraud investigators team would create fake documents that looked like real inside information but were designed to bait Ben into incriminating himself. I was terrified, but my fraud investigator assured me her team had experience in undercover operations. They'd have agents monitoring nearby who could intervene if things went wrong. Tuesday, I flew there and called Ben. I told him I'd had a change of heart and identified projects at the company that Dad works at that were perfect for his plan. He sounded pleased but suspicious. He agreed to meet on Wednesday at his office, warning that he wanted specifics. The fraud investigators team armed me with detailed fake documents, insurance policies, project schedules, and security procedures. They looked real enough to convince Ben, but every detail was meant to trap him into admitting crimes. Wednesday's meeting went better than expected. Ben pored over the fake documents, thrilled. For over 2 hours, he explained exactly how he wanted me to stage incidents at my dad's company. He named equipment that should be stolen, how to fake accidents, and which adjusters could be manipulated. But then he got cocky. He bragged about orchestrating dozens of fraudulent claims in Arizona and New Mexico, even naming companies and accomplices. He explained how to launder the payouts through shell companies and offshore accounts, down to how my cut would be hidden. Finally, he told me to start implementing his plan within 2 weeks and revealed he already had contacts in my hometown lined up to help stage incidents. What Ben didn't know was that I was wired. The fraud investigators team monitored the entire meeting and had been tracking his shell companies for years. By Thursday morning, we got the news that they had enough for federal charges against Ben and at least 6 others in his network. Arrests were coming within 24 hours. She told me to stay somewhere safe. The fraud investigator called later to confirm Ben had been denied bail and could be facing decades in prison. His lawyers were already discussing a plea deal because the evidence was overwhelming. Even better, federal prosecutors agreed I was a victim, not a willing accomplice. The fraud investigator had shown them how Ben manipulated me from the beginning with fake documents and threats. The evidence made clear I was being coerced. Prosecutors want me to testify at trial, but I won't face charges. They said victims often end up in situations like mine, and my cooperation helped dismantle Ben's network. For now, I'm staying with my parents while figuring out what's next. I'm not sure I want to go back to marketing. I want something fulfilling, not just financially secure. The best part is knowing Ben can't harm our family again. His network is shut down, and investigators recovered over $8 million in fraudulent claims. Insurance companies are reviewing hundreds of suspicious claims tied to him. I'll probably always carry trust issues after what Ben put me through, but I'm grateful for my family who helped me fight back. I never thought I'd be brave enough to stand up to someone like Ben, but sometimes you have no choice. If anyone else is being manipulated or blackmailed, please know there are people who can help. You don't have to face it alone. Ben tried to use my desperation and loyalty against me, but those same things gave me the strength to protect the people I love. I hope he spends the rest of his life in federal prison thinking about the lives he destroyed with his greed. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.